Uh,
Got it.
Okay. His debut poetry collection, River Street Rhapsody, is currently available from Dead Fern Press. His fiction novellas, Song of the Red Squire and Hard Mountain Clay, are forthcoming from Nose Touch Press and Shotgun Honey, respectively. Should I just introduce Gabe as well, and then I guess we'll go into the readings. Gabriel Hart lives in Morongo Valley in California's high desert. His literary pulp collection, Fallout from Our Asphalt Hell, is out now from Close to the Bone. He's the author of Palm Springs noir novelette, A Return to Spring, from 2020 Madison Press, the dispo-apocalyptic twin novel Virgins in Reverse / The Intrusion, 2019 Traveling Shoes Press, his debut poetry collection, Unsongs, Volume 1, and the Pushcart nominated story, The Maid and the Maidens. Other works can be found at Expat Press, Misery Tourism, Rock and a Hard Place magazine, and Punk Noir. He's a regular contributor to Lit Reactor, Los Angeles Review of Books, and is a co-conspirator at Arts/Culture Site from the Last Estate. Okay, cool. So I think CW, you're up first. If you want to read a selection of poems from your new collection, congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
So this is my new collection, River Street Rhapsody. It's out from Dead Fern Press. It's my first collection of poems. I've been a short story author for a very long time, but this collection of poems it just came out just a couple of weeks ago. So a lot of new stuff that I just written over the last year. You know, I've written poems my whole life, but this is something I really wanted to focus on just from new experiences and sort of at my current writing level. But I wanted to share maybe about 4 poems with you tonight. So I'm just going to go through some of these that have been published, and some of these have maybe folks have singled out as some of their faves. You never know what to read. There's 40 poems in this book, but I'm just going to kind of start through and take them slow. The first poem is called The Six-Chambered Heart. A biker bar in Truckee, a roadside motel off Highway 5, a string of dismal parking rides across the Central Valley. She tailed him through every greasy underpass and truck stop parking lot here to the Nevada border, while he broke her heart one $50 hooker at a time. In Delray Oaks, she found a new heart behind the counter of a discount pawn shop. 6 chambers of blued steel with a trigger that tallied each roadside fuck and forged them into lead fire. She gave him her heart, a bouquet of muzzle flashes. She made it beat, beat, beat just for him. So that was a poem I wrote, I think, when I first started this collection. I had in mind just 40 crime poems related to all sorts of different types of crime. This was one of the ones that I thought would fit really well. The book sort of evolved to different types of poetry, but I'm going to continue on that same theme and sort of some of the early ones that kind of formed the early idea of this book. The next poem I want to read is called River Street Rhapsody, and it's the title poem of the book. Kind of sets the stage for the rest of the collection as well. After drugstore vodka and dive bar jukeboxes, cigarette cherries drowned in votive wax, after razored lines of Percocet on gas station toilets, through city streets bleeding orange in the lamplight, you reach the trash-strewn levee where hustlers make midnight commerce on the San Lorenzo River. Shadows gather like cutouts in a child's diorama, down among the stones and reeds and trash heaps and dolls' heads and dead birds and eddies of daffodil foam, where every so often a corpse wheels by on abscessed arms and catches in the wax myrtles. A needle-like rain rushes from the bay, and you shelter beneath the footbridge, where you exchange your last 20 for a hand job and a few hits of crystal. A lot of these kind of follow a few different characters throughout the collection, but some, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, some of these poems more have to do with sort of my relationship to my city, my own personal relationship with the changes growing up through the city, and how things have changed over the years. The next one, let's see if I can find it. Lost my place here. And this is one of those sort of panoramas that I wrote about where I live, the town of Santa Cruz. It's called Streetlight Sonata. I ask the city her name, and ribbons of silver monikers unspool over brick facades, iron girdings, storefront windows. I ask the city her name, and piano chords bleed through a gauze of night fog, twisting their indigo melodies onto scaffolds and bus stops. I ask the city her name, and 1,000 decrepit payphones erupt in the alleyways as if all the world's coins fell clattering in the street. I ask the city her name, and votives ignite in church windows, cruciform shadows stamped onto gum-stained sidewalks. Every night I ask, and the city confesses her heart in languages of light and shadow, sound and silence, hope and fear, time and timelessness. The last one I wanted to read is called The Train Doesn't Run Here Anymore. I guess if there's time, maybe later we can do more, but I want to kind of get these done and then turn it over to Gabe and we can have the discussion. The train doesn't run here anymore. I hear the rattle of crank pins and the skirling iron rails in some fog-soaked hour before dawn. The crushing weight of miles dieseling through the city. But the train doesn't run here anymore. I see yellow weeds tufting between the ties, bottle glass in the speckled quartz, where cigarettes smolder and condoms sag over the warped and rusted rails. But the train doesn't run here anymore. I remember black smoke rising and the banshee death whistle as the old iron train found me on Jade Street's back acre. How the crows scattered and childhood split like brittle wood. But the train doesn't run here anymore. I feel that old shudder in the apartment's dry rot bones. The start of a tembler or a northbound freight broken loose from a junkyard fleet, a quake fissuring from the past. But the train doesn't run here anymore. Those are the four I got for you. And I want to have time to turn it over to Gabe as well. Thanks, guys.
That was amazing, Cedar.
Awesome.
Yeah, that was great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, the repetition and the descriptive language is out of this world. So
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Gabe, are you ready?
I'm ready. Be reading from my new collection, Hymns from the Whipping Post, on First Cut Poetry, Close to the Bone in the UK. And I'm just gonna start with the title track called Hymn at the Whipping Posts. God, give me the courage to be hated, no breakthroughs inside a closed mind. Condemned from emotion, I'm emotionally baited, every phase of my life reduced, erased, yet somehow defined. God, give me the strength as they whip me. I remove my armor, hoping they would oblige. Yet they now don it as one more layer, as if I had the strength in me to fight. So God, as they tear my skin from me, allow my bones to further calcify, a statuesque monument to sincerity, until the mob's sanity is denied. Next one's called Impotent Cremations. Sincerity shall inflame the insincere who incinerates, receipt tape flowing from my behind. I even gave correct change from every currency I was up against. yet they spaz in the ashes on hoarded time. Kicking up dust now, dust blind. My eyes wide, only I can put the periods at the end of my lines. This is how you get whole again. This is how you go home again. The hole I've dug myself to lie in for a smaller gathering of only my closest friends. Next one's called A Ghost in Her Apartment. She finally let me in again, this time from an altered state. So she couldn't say, oh, you again. Her crooked mouth, eyes elevate. So I put both feet inside this time, only because of her evacuation. I was a ghost in her apartment. I'm not sure anything has changed. I could commit to creepy crawl it. The furniture could rearrange. Instead, I keep picking up things, returning them perfect to their space. A melancholic compulsion to fix what cannot be replaced. A dissociating ghoul, wondering why I'm here. I float into her bedroom. No answers there either. My own presence is exhausting me. A fatigue lulls me disarmed properly to her living room, but there's no one here to alarm. In order to keep retracing steps, I slam her bedroom door, lie on the couch, cross my arms, a corpse. Since she's not there to touch me, trembling, I feel myself up instead. Then fall into a sort of sleep. Wake up, I'm not dreaming. Divine the remote, turn on the TV. That's when it fucking hit me. That's all she ever wanted. Sit here, don't talk, just be with me. Back in those halcyon nights when I was a ghost in her apartment. And let's see, move it on. This one's called Intimacy of Rodents in Tight Spots. Valium with the V's pressed out on a string, a candy bracelet around the wrist. Fist holds a 40 ounce. Take a bite like you mean it, an undulated sip to wash it down. While we all showed him the sewers, in the end, Rat Boy freaked us out. When his own gutter overfloweth, floating us to church service, not to worship, merely viewers, consuming Rat Boy, his final image, to burn our brains. Now, if we could only learn to pray in permanence. Next one is called Then Who Will Love Them? Peace, it's a fine thought until I got it. Oh my God, I'm already seeing a typo. Peace, it's a fine thought until I had it. What now? A woman offers her heart to me. I'm not allowed to reach out and grab it. The sanctity of therapy, chastity instead of my preferred habits. Then who will love them? Tell me. Oh, what? I have a type, a dark pattern I must break. Sounds like a unique rhythm to me, but now I'm done with this charade. Who will love them then? Watch, it will be someone just like me who has earned true gravity, the velocity of their storm from the front lines. Yet you, my therapist, along with friends, family, continue to warn against loving those who need it most, those inverse pariahs maligned. So now I ask the questions, who will love them? Since I've learned the ritualistic occult secrets of taking care of myself, guess what? I'm fucking bored. I'm sick of this peace of mind, craving the absolute sacrifice. Now it's time to take care of someone else. They're not your responsibility, the therapist says. A lover cannot be a doctor too. Behind her clipboard, I catch her eyes. Aren't you 60? Live alone, I ask. Sounds like nobody's loving you. Got two more quick ones. One's called Shelter to Cinder. And yeah, shout out to William, who suggested this term from a tweet into a poem. I tore apart the tweaker's shack, now firewood for the winter, my little way of getting back at them when they burn their shelter to cinder. Their field mice escaped to bunk with me, assuming they were evading flame, yet all I'm doing here, waiting for the half-sane human being to earn my heating, a reason to learn the discipline of a controlled burn. I'll end with this one called Savior Invasive. Look at me. I've achieved absolute empathy, now floating from my body, so my white skin might deliver you from your hunger. I've gifted you your own day, since your days are so numbered. Your face displayed, backlit sun rays, a head on stake, overexposure. Above you now, looking down on those lesser than me, whose weaknesses I have supplied, amplified, then defined you by. Would your own McDonald's brand pacify you? My head in the clouds, my bullhorn loud, to drown out the calm of living by example. Thanks.
That's great. Your poems are so sonically compelling and emotionally intense.
Oh, thank
Really
you.
appreciate it. Yeah. Great. So I prepared a few questions for both of you. But if anyone else has questions, just drop them into the chat. So the first thing that I was curious about, as someone who pretty much only writes, sort of only writes poetry, I'm curious how the process of, writing these poems for you is similar to or different from writing prose and fiction. Do you feel like there is anything that you can express through poetry that you can't express through prose, or vice versa?
CW, you want to take this one first?
Yeah, sure. It's a really good question, because I think for me, and I primarily write fiction, short stories and novellas. I'm a poet too, and I love writing poetry. But with the fiction, there are so many things you have to sort of keep in balance, right? You've got to get the dialogue right, you've got to get the plotting right, you've got to get the pacing right, you've got to get the character development right, you've got to get the first paragraph right. And it's all these things sort of have to come into harmony, and you can't ignore one or the other. You could if you wanted to, depending on your style, but all these things kind of come together to form a story. And oftentimes, at least I feel with writing fiction, is that my favorite thing to write is atmosphere and vibe, and so if you focus too much on that in writing and you don't have enough of the other, maybe the story kind of suffers. But for me personally, I feel like, if I had a choice, maybe I would just write nothing but vibe, and it doesn't really work from a story perspective. But with poetry, you can kind of do that, right? You can focus just on the vibe, and you can just create this pure sort of atmospheric feeling within a few different stanzas, and really get that sort of gratification of just zoning in, homing in on that one thing. So I think that's why I love poetry, is that it really kind of scratches that itch. You're able to kind of take that spark, that creative spark, and just zoom in on just that spark, and nothing else. And I don't know, that's why I love it. And that's how it kind of informs my writing.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I kind of, like with my prose, I tend to be really super conceptual. Like I'll mentally prepare myself before I start writing a piece. Whereas with poetry, it often kind of hits me out of nowhere, like when I least expect it. Like I'm really into titles. Like a lot of times when I think of a phrase, I think, oh, that should be a title for my next piece or something. But then like with prose, when I think of those phrases where I'm not sure where it comes from, I'll see it as something I have to like try to decipher in like 3,000 words, you know what I mean? Where but other times, like that line I see is just like the first line of a poem that ends up being more self-contained and easier, like quicker to explore, and without the pressure to like resolve like you feel with prose. Like, yeah, like CW said, with poetry, the point is more like a mere feeling you're trying to document.
Yeah. Awesome. Let's see. Okay. Speaking of feelings that you're trying to document, one very short poem in Gabe's collection, which is titled Verdict. I'll just read this one. Is writing is nothing if it isn't just letting the bad go free. To what extent do you believe that or agree with it or disagree with it?
The first, like, I don't know, the first thing that makes me think of is just like the last thing I want to read these days is anything with a tidy moral compass, because in real life, like, we're often not prepared for the even wider scope of humanity we have to face in moral turbulence. So that's why it's always really messy, you know? And so I feel like I'd rather explore unsavory parts of myself, like to gain control over them by turning it all kind of inside out and like expose it, rather than like force a treatise on how to live to the reader. It's like, I think that's just insulting for any grown-ass adult.
Yeah, when I hear the letting go of the bad, I think of writing as a catharsis, and that's definitely true for I think for a lot of writers I know, right? Being able to sort of to take these feelings, sometimes negative feelings, and sort of exercise them and work them through the process of literature, and just sort of spit them back out into the world, and in that process, right, you get this catharsis, this feeling of sort of this emptying of the bad, and you have this kind of the idea of writing as therapy, and I know a lot of folks who write this way, and I do too, to a certain extent. My writing tends to come more from a subconscious point of view, where I'm not trying to write a certain thing. I usually don't sit down and say I want to write this for this reason, although sometimes I do. I think for me, mostly it's writing from I'm getting these kind of, it sounds weird, but we're all writers. You know what we're talking about. You get these kind of signals from your subconscious, these kind of like these images, these scenes, and you kind of want to explore them. For me, I think that's more how I kind of write. But another kind of take on that is, and letting go of the bad. It's almost kind of like, it reminds me of kind of the debate in writing about writing bad characters who are kind of who don't have a good moral compass. But Gabe, you talked about this a little bit about the moral compass and kind of ignoring it, or I forget exactly what you said, but I think there's a big debate on how sort of these characters, how we write these characters, and whether or not they should be written in a certain way. I personally love to have the kind of the exploring sort of the dark side and letting that out, and through these kind of sort of the depravity. And if we don't have sort of an accurate sort of description of this type of character in our writing, I don't think we're being honest with what society really is. So, and letting out that bad is what you're talking about. If that's in kind of like, in a way of really sort of releasing these kind of these demons that we see in society through our fiction, I think that's also a pretty good thing to be able to accurately sort of describe and give justice to sort of this whole variety of personalities that we see in our society. If that makes sense.
That's super well put.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, speaking of, releasing these sort of grittier aspects of society. CW, your collection is pretty explicitly drawing from, your hometown.
Yeah.
And Gabe, you also have a poem titled Avoiding You in a Small Town, population 2,900. So I wonder, what would you say is the role that geography and place play in your poems and in your life in general?
You want to take that one, CW?
Sure. I mean, in terms of this, my current, River Street Rhapsody, the poems I've been reading, it's the the basis of the whole book, and it really has to do with, I live in Santa Cruz, California, and it's kind of if you've ever been here, it's a tourist town, right? And it's beautiful. And we've got this beautiful redwood forest and, beaches, and, people come from all over the world to visit here. And, a lot of the stories that are written about Santa Cruz, right, and poems, and I've tried to read as much as I can. They tend to be very sort of idyllic, right? Because reflecting that sort of that natural beauty. You read a lot of romance novels and cozies, and those are all cool if you're into that too. I'm not putting any genres down, but what it does, and what tends to happen though, at least in my town, is that the grittier aspects are not really talked about. And I call them gritty, but it's really just reality. We have just a really some of the social issues that we face are not really discussed in literature in terms of my town, specifically relating to homelessness, the opioid epidemic, and now it's meth and fentanyl, mental health. All these things sort of come together and create this sort of this big sort of crisis that we have in the streets. And just last year in my town, we recorded a record number of street deaths. So, while people are, flying in and spending all this money on hotels, and we've got, Google executives in Silicon Valley buying up all the property and just leaving all these houses empty, for vacation homes that they never really come to. While all that's going on, right, you've got people just literally dying in the streets, and that stuff just isn't really. We tend to either ignore it or get really angry about it, but rarely, or ever, I haven't really seen folks really sort of try to cover it and discuss it with all the nuances in poetry or fiction. So that's what I really try to do with the book, is to really sort of take an honest look at something that really isn't really talked about. And I'm a crime analyst too by day. And so, a lot of these stories, I sort of read all the in depth about, folks struggling and living and loving and dying on the streets. And I wanted to kind of do that justice. So. What about you, Gabe?
Yeah, I grew up in a really similar kind of what I feel is a similar spot to Santa Cruz. I grew up in Laguna Beach, that sounds like it had that same stigma. It's like a postcard perfect beach town. The novel I'm shopping right now is basically just kind of about the seedy underbelly of such a place. So I can definitely relate to that kind of geography. The geography, in this collection, geography kind of plays a big part. I think the desert plays a big role in it. I think it speaks to the kind of the solitude and the dustiness and the kind of trapped in your head quality of the poems, and like the terror of finally being alone with your thoughts. Like the desert's a funny place because people come here, like a lot of LA people, much like myself, come here for peace, and they're usually not prepared for what that final price to pay before you get it. There's a very particular, very personal horror, I feel like, that you have to face to find peace out here. And like many move out here thinking that it's just going to be this instant overnight change to tranquility. But the move is just usually the first smart move you made that opens to this other very raw and vulnerable place you might not be prepared for. It's like this secret untold story that kind of happens to most people that move out here. It's interesting. So yeah, I think it kind of, some of these poems kind of capture that.
Yeah, I think they definitely do. Great. Let's see. What was the most difficult part of putting these books out for you, either while writing or editing or publishing? Yeah.
I mean, for me, I think, the book didn't really know what it wanted to be at first. And I think that kind of, with poetry collections, it's kind of, I think it tends to be kind of that way, right? where, you know, maybe you're collecting stuff from a while ago and putting it all together. This was something that I was writing from scratch. So I'd write a few poems and then kind of like trying to figure out exactly, you know, where it was going and what the theme was. I started out and it was just crime poetry. You know, it was just stuff that, with a sort of a cast of characters that would pop up throughout the book. But then I realized, you know, writing about my hometown, I had all these sort of emotional attachments that to the place to my hometown that I wanted to explore as well. So, you know, you heard that with a poem, you know, so the train doesn't come here anymore. And you know, that was, I was walking with my son, he's 13, and we were walking along the railroad tracks. I'm like, hey, be careful, be careful, look out for the train. He's like, that. He's like, the train, the train doesn't run here for like, 10 years, nobody's seen the train in a while. And I'm like, oh yeah, but in your memory, when you're thinking back to the kid, I always remember the train coming through. And so, these kind of moments, it reminded me of my own personal sort of relationship with the city, as well as just crime poems. And so I wanted to explore that aspect of it too. And that kind of sort of took on this whole new dimension with the book, is that it's not, it became bigger than what I thought it would be. And so, with more breadth and depth. And so, I think that was the most challenging part, to answer your question, is that the collection didn't really know what it wanted to be. And I didn't really know either. And it took a while, and it took a few iterations, and it took me getting rid of, a half dozen poems and just putting them aside and not including them here, in order to get some sort of cohesion and maybe a little bit of an arc to the reading. So, yeah.
God, I wish I had as good of an answer as CW. I don't know if I would say Hymns was like a difficult book to release. I just kind of told myself I'd start writing another collection after I turned in my last one to Craig from Close to the Bone. And so I just spent all of last year just writing these really slowly, kind of no pressure. Although like countless lines obviously scribbled out and reconfigured. But yeah, I would say poetry is a lot, I think CW said this, poetry is a lot more difficult for me to foresee. I don't know what shape it would take, as opposed to my fiction, where I have the ideas all kind of mapped out ahead of time, like what I want to accomplish with that. So yeah, I had no idea what form they were going to take, whether there'd be any reoccurring themes or anything. But Hymns is, I will say, it's chronological in the order I wrote them. So yeah, I think I'm still trying to figure out some kind of secret subplot in them.
Yeah, that's a very sort of common observation. I think Robert Frost said, "No surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader." So we do tend to surprise ourselves when we write poetry.
Totally.
Yeah.
That said, you must both have poets who have been sources of inspiration for you. Who would you say are either your favorite poets in general, or poets whose styles influenced you for these specific collections?
Yeah, I know for me, I always read poetry, growing up and when I was a student and in high school. But, I think for me, when in college, I started reading Octavio Paz, and it just absolutely blew me away. I thought, oh my God, this is like the stuff that he covers and the way that he writes about sort of urban scenes, which is very much, what I kind of went for too, obviously with River Street Rhapsody. But I didn't know that, you could write in that sort of way. And I think all the poetry that I had read is very, it's very strong in imagery. In the past, I'd read stuff that's very strong in imagery, but nothing that was really sort of detailed down to like the street level, where it's just, dealing with, even, you know, the smell of the street, the way that the curbs, you know, the angles of the curbs. And he's just like, Octavio Paz is just like a brilliant sort of urban wordsmith. And so when I read that, I was a complete poetry convert at that point. After that, I would say a poet that's not very well known is Julianne Buxbaum. And she writes a lot about very dark themes, and she relies on language and vocabulary that's sort of challenging. But what's really interesting is that with her, I think, and the way it's influenced me, is that she relies on this very challenging vocabulary, but she does so in this very sort of dark and interesting way, where it's not like, you know, a lot of times you read poetry and they throw a lot of big words out there and it's almost kind of too academic. But she sort of takes the sort of the almost academic language of poetry down to this sort of really sort of dark, sort of very interesting, dreamy, lots of decay. And so it's this kind of, you have this juxtaposition in styles that's really interesting. So I would reckon she definitely had an impact on my book. Tragically, she died recently of Lyme disease. And then the last I would recommend is Linda Hull. If you've ever heard of Linda Hull, she put out, this is a collection of all her works, and big impact on my book as well. What she sort of does is she brought in sort of the noir element, right? So again, she's more of an academic, but an academic with this sort of this noir kind of style, where she brings in a lot of like, you know, it's almost like you're watching like a 1940s or 1950s sort of Billy Wilder flick, but with all of these like very strong poetic aspects to it. So very unique style. And I can't recommend her, you know, more highly. So, what about you, Gabe?
Yeah, I feel like I could go on and on about like the classics and stuff. Like, I mean, I really love like Baudelaire and stuff, but I also love like musicians that were really into Baudelaire and how they kind of spit out that influence, that Baudelaire influence with like that kind of like, in that kind of musician lifestyle, like Patti Smith and Jim Morrison and like Jeffrey Lee Pierce, the Gun Club, and yeah, so there's like that vibe. Chris Desjardins from the Flesh Eaters is another one. But yeah, for me, it kind of really starts with Baudelaire. I love Wanda Coleman. I feel like I'm always trying to bullhorn her. She's kind of one of the lesser celebrated poets from Black Sparrow. I like her better than Bukowski. But yeah, I mean, I honestly, I mean, I spend more time thinking about my peers these days. Like, I just think it's like a really exciting time for poetry, especially like this whole like noir kind of poetry crossover. Like, I have to give like a huge shout out to Stephen Jay Golds, who he's sort of helped put this little scene together. I mean, beyond me being a huge fan of his work, he kind of, I owe the existence of both my poetry books to him, because he kind of urged me, and I know kind of, yeah, CW was kind of part of that whole kind of group of people he put together last year. It was just, so I was like kind of amazed. I was in such great company. So I'm like, HLR was like really amazing to me. I think her,
oh, she's great, fantastic.
Yeah, like History of Present Complaint, like that book was kind of showed me that poetry can still find new form and voice and style and all that. I mean,
yes,
that book's just super singular to me. And it's
an absolute angel too.
Yeah. Oh yeah, she's great. Just hard on sleeve, just gold.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Will and Rudy are here. I feel like every Friday when we meet at Misery Loves Company, I just feel like I'm alongside some of the best poets out there. Rudy's great, Jesse Hilson, Elizabeth V. Aldrich, Adam Johnson. There's this guy Keko from Croatia that stays up until the wee hours so he can join us, and he just slays everyone every time. So yeah, I'm really, I spend a lot of time just thinking about my peers these days, almost more than the classics. So that, I think that's a really good sign, I think.
Great. There are many, many very talented writers among our corner of Twitter. So that said, I know there are other writers here tonight. Now that you both have a collection out, and not even your first publications, do you have any advice for other folks, for other writers?
You want to go first, CW?
As far as writing advice goes, it's a tricky thing, right? Because it's just basically whatever it takes to get it out is what you got to do, right? Whatever works. I'm a pragmatist, so whatever works best is the best solution, right? I think a lot of people try to follow certain rules to get certain results, but ultimately, whatever gets you to that product, that finished product, is what you got to do. For me, a couple of things that I do that I think maybe are that help me a lot on the technical side for writing is, you've always heard people talk about sort of reading aloud your poetry or your fiction. I do that for sure, and sometimes I even record it and listen to it back. But I also like to sort of write down my poetry and my fiction in different formats. So, I'll have a final draft, and then I'll PDF it, and I'll read it as a PDF, and then I'll print it out, and I'll read it printed out, and then I'll read it aloud, and I'll go through it aloud. So I think the more sort of different sort of formats you can read your draft in, the more it's the cleaner and cleaner and cleaner it's going to become. At least that's my experience. So it's a lot like, Gabe and I are both musicians. And so, when you record a song, one of the things that you do, in the studio is, you go out and you play it in your car, right? And just to hear how it sounds over car speakers, just to make sure the mix is right. Because you pick stuff up, you pick stuff out and you go, oh shit, that's way too loud, or you can't hear the guitar in that track or whatever it is. But and it's the same thing with writing. For whatever reason, it doesn't make any sense. But what I found is that the more sort of formats you review your work in, the more stuff comes out that you can kind of smooth out and make better and make much stronger in the end. So that's technical advice. I don't know if that's what you wanted, but I know that's something that works for me.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, that's all really astute. I think the only advice I would have is just sort of like a recent change in me. Like I totally support like the daily grind of writing, but I think there comes a point where not writing is just as important as writing. Like those kind of deceptive periods of non-activity where you actually get to reflect on yourself. Then often when you come back to your latest piece, you kind of find that it's all wrong and that it didn't age well, even 3 days later, and you don't get that kind of perspective when you're just nose to the stone all the time. Like I've slowed way. I think some might consider me a very prolific writer, but I've as a rule, I've made the conscious decision this year to just slow way down submitting stuff left and right like I used to, because I saw it happening there too. Like pieces that were accepted, I just wasn't happy with once they finally saw the sun. You know what I mean? Just because I was just happy for an acceptance anywhere. You know what I mean? Instead of just really thinking about what I'm doing and really thinking about who I'm aligning myself with and who reflects my character and all that. So yeah, I guess my my advice would be don't feel that pressure that you have to be as prolific as others might be. Like there's nothing wrong with writing like 12 pieces at a time, but have the self-respect to be just patient before you release them to the wild. And I guess on that same note, I don't know, maybe just for everyone's mental health, maybe don't spend so much, maybe don't pay too much attention to what's going on besides the writing in your scene or whatever. Like pay less attention to what others are doing if it doesn't have anything to do with writing, so it doesn't so whatever scene you're in doesn't become the cannibalistic echo chamber it's constantly threatening to be.
Yeah, no, that's good advice. I can definitely agree with that for sure. No, those are good insights, Gabe, for sure, no doubt.
Well, thank you both so much. Those are all my questions. Congratulations again on your books. I think should we just open it up to the chat, or I don't know if other folks have comments or thoughts.
Yeah. Oh God, Steve Gold just showed up. Hey, Steve. We were just talking.
Steve,
we were just singing your praises, man.
is Steve here?
I just saw him.
Hey guys.
Oh, it's Steve Golds. What's going on, buddy?
How are you, man?
Hey guys. Yeah, sorry for being late. Guys.
Oh, no problem. No problem.
We're the man, the myth, the legend. That's awesome. We were just wrapping it up, sort of, and turning it over to the to everyone else. But glad you're here,
shit.
man. I know it's all right.
Well, it's good to see that you guys are recording it, so I can catch up on what I missed.
Yeah. For those who don't know, Steve Golds lives in Japan. He's a British expat that lives in Japan. So yeah, his time zones. It's tomorrow over there, right, Steve? Is that how it works? It's like tomorrow morning over there?
It would be Sunday morning.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, it's Sunday morning.
Sunday morning.
Yeah.
It's funny that you dropped by, because I read a few poems when we started this, but there's one, and I know you've read it, Steve, but there's actually one I'd like to read here that is written after one of your poems as well.
Oh, please do. I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, I'd love that, man. Thanks so much.
So when I was writing, this book, and I read Poems for Ghosts as well, and coming to the end of it, it just left me with like, sometimes you kind of search for something when you sit down to write a poem and you don't know what to write about, and sometimes after reading something like like Steve's work, it's just like, oh yeah, I got to write a poem. You're just full of like this creative energy, and I know that's how I felt after I read Poems for Ghosts. And so I wrote this one. It's called What She Left on the Liquor Cart, and it's after one of Steve's poems. And the quote I have is, it remind me of the name of the poem. I can't remember it, but it goes, "Coffee black like your hair and your eyes, hot like we were, percolating, boiling." It's just so it's so sexy, And so I wrote this poem. I'll read it for you now. What she left on the liquor cart. She dressed before sunrise and left without a note or DM or lipstick on the mirror or anything to tell she wasn't some bourbon dream or lonely delusion of the heart. He looks for her through the window glass, down where crowds spill like shattered porcelain or tiny street-side confessions. On the liquor cart, he finds a cigarette case, old and nickel-plated, something Ava Gardner might leave behind in a hurry. A lock of coffee black hair and a lone cigarette inside. He lights the smoke and steps onto the fire escape, twisting the ribbon of hair in his fingers, blinking away the starred city lights. His brain wades through last night's booze, and he recalls pleading that she leave something, anything, to remember her by. Anyway. That was dedicated to Steve.
Yeah, actually, I want to share kind of a Steve Gold's type poem called The Trade. I feel like this is in his spirit. It's called The Trade. And I wish I could, it's sort of formatted like that. So when I feel I am far damn too whole, I'm reminded I am far down 2 holes. The bottle I trade one ecstatic night for 3 days rife with existential doubt. Trapped in my body, the wasteland, my spirit, the fumes of a breathing corpse. The woman I trade one ecstatic night for the rest of my life, my body, soul, and mind, the quicksand. Now for her I worry instead of for myself, of course.
Nice. Love that
Both
one, Gabe.
fantastic poems. Good job, guys.
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, I have to say, I mean, you know, the intersection of noir and poetry, I think, like CW and Gabe were saying, it's kind of a very specific niche that, you know, that all 3 of you have contributed to carving out. So kudos there. Well, if there aren't any other sort of questions, Gabe, should we maybe end the recording?
Yeah, I'll leave you guys with the link to the book. And yeah.
It's like,
yeah. Oh, what's up, Steve?
guys, I got one question. I don't know whether you guys covered it or not, but I wanted you guys to talk. I don't know if you've already talked about it, but have you guys talked about where you find your most inspiration? That's what I wanted to hear about the most, because you both come from such different backgrounds. Gabe, you're coming from, you know, kind of a musical background, this kind of how do I say, this kind of, for me, in my kind of thinking, you come from a kind of a new age kind of noir, and then CW comes from like an old school kind of noir. So I wanted to know where you guys got your main inspiration. Where do you guys draw from the most? I don't know whether you've talked about that already, but or maybe you can talk about it one more time to go in it deeper. But I was really interested to hear that from both of you guys related to your poetry.
So are you talking most like about our geography? Like is the question slanted towards more of like where we come from, or just like our what we like to read and stuff like that?
Not really geography, but I mean your main inspirations when you put pen down to paper or when you really start writing. Where do you think where's your main resources come from? You know, daily life, or perhaps music, or day job, you know, relationships. Where's your main kind of where do you mainly draw from? Where do you drill from?
God, that's such a good question. Do you want to take that one first, CW?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question to answer. There's no doubt, because there's a bit of a mystery to it. There's no doubt about it. I think on the more practical level, yeah, the day job. You know, I work as a crime analyst, and so you know, my job, you know, from the day to day, it can be fairly boring. You know, I'm mostly, you know, doing a lot of statistics, and so tracking, you know, what types of crimes are happening in what parts of town at what time of day and night. But then, you know, there's also, you know, I read a lot of, you know, sort of really in-depth reports, police reports, and you know, you kind of see a lot of the nitty-gritty that happens in a city that isn't reported, right? So the things that you don't sort of read in the papers, I see a lot. I see all that stuff, and so, you know, the first thing I think that strikes me, you know, in my job that was really sort of hard to get used to is learning about, you know, how many, all the death, you know, just the sheer amount of death in the streets that occur. and the news won't report it unless it's a very sort of public death, like it's somebody gets shot in the street, they'll report that. But if somebody just dies in a creek or dies in an underpass or dies on a park bench, because of a fentanyl exposure or an OD, heroin, some bad junk, or or even just through exposure, it'll just be like something that comes and goes. Suicide, same thing. They don't. It's not something that we report, but the bodies, they just keep coming and coming and coming. And for every one, there's a report. And I know I'm sounding really dark right now, but when you're a writer, you kind of on the one hand, my day job is to keep track of the statistics of death and crime. But as a writer and as a person with a heart and compassion, you try to want to make sense of that from like a deeper philosophical level. And literature, of course, writing was a great way to do that. And so for that way, it is kind of an outlet. The other thing I'd say is that I'm a definite believer in sort of nurturing the subconscious for getting ideas for writing, and I think David Lynch is a huge inspiration to me. That the movies of David Lynch is just like and when you're watching a David Lynch film, you don't know, and I don't think he knows really, and I know I follow him, but these ideas and these scenes and this vibe and this atmosphere, it's coming from something beyond, it's coming from something deep in this, rooted in the subconscious. And, it's something that isn't really practical, not something that you can kind of go out and find, but it's something that you can listen to, and it's, and get inspiration and develop and nurture. And so for me, it's kind of those two, kind of that push and pull. It's the day job, but I also really try to nurture that, tapping into that subconscious thought and finding inspiration from it, as strange and weird as it is. But, I usually find a lot of those, the most purest sort of, the most pure sort of images and ideas and scenes from the subconscious. They tend to be pretty original too, which is refreshing. So I try to listen to that. So that's how I'd answer the questions, and my inspirations from the day job and nurturing the subconscious.
CW, I've always been curious, and I apologize if you've already done this and I just don't know, but have you ever written like a nonfiction piece about your day job, like something just really matter of fact and just kind of informative?
I want to. It's on the horizon. So in my town in the 1970s, it was very interesting. And you've heard of the serial killer Kemper, right? Ed Kemper.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so he was from Santa Cruz. But at the same time as Kemper, we had two other serial killers also going through Santa Cruz and killing people. Between the three of them, I think there were like 25 people that they managed to kill in a year and a half period.
Did the Golden State Killer go through Santa Cruz?
No, he did not. No. But there are suspected others that came through as well. Sort of one-offs. So I've always thought about writing about that period of time when Santa Cruz was my hometown was called in the papers. It was called the murder capital of the world.
Oh my God.
When people just didn't even want to go outside. And it was weird because, this is the early 70s, the town was very small at that point, but people were being picked up, mostly hitchhikers, but also really random stuff where, home invasions and people are getting just slaughtered, and ended up being mostly three serial killers that were working independently of each other prolifically at the same time. So I've always wanted to write about that, whether it's nonfiction or fictionalized, that sort of build a fiction story on top of that or underneath that.
Yeah.
I would love to.
Yeah, there's something so inherently, we never had a serial killer in Laguna, but there's something about a beachside town that just attracts that like you're literally like, it's like, I think Joan Didion's mentions in her essay Where I Come From, it's like we've run out of continent. You know what I mean? It's like you're literally on the edge of of civilization, and I think the ocean kind of attracts this real fringe type of character that have run out of options.
Yeah.
And I was always like my childhood in Laguna, it was idyllic in some senses, but it created this very tangible, like really tangible, seedy underbelly. Yeah, there's something about the ocean, I think, just it's frightening like that.
Nowhere else to go. Sure.
Yeah. Steve, to answer your question, it's a really good question and a tough one to answer, but I think I sometimes get self-conscious that for a fiction writer, that I don't have enough imagination as other writers I know and love. But what I do like to pull from is that point in real life where that sort of linear, I guess, that liminal space where life literally becomes noir. I guess that I guess I write from that place where you think, I couldn't make this shit up. I feel like I just always return to that place, and I often try to fictionalize it to protect it in a way, if that makes any sense. That's the best I can it's the best answer I can give to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. How about Steph as well? How about Steph's writing?
Okay, so it's changed over time. You know, I just put out a chapbook of mostly earlier poems, and a lot of those were about my family history and growing up, sort of, you know, as a child of, you know, diaspora or whatever. But over time, that's definitely shifted. I think in the last couple of years, I write more about, you know, sort of what CW was saying. Like, I try to tap my subconscious or unconscious. I would say about 33% of my poems now are sort of inspired directly by dreams that I've journaled. And I've gone through periods of writer's block where I actually try to induce lucid dreaming to get over it. There's a supplement that you can order from a company called Dream Tech. I'm not making this up.
Way.
Oh,
Yep.
Would you put that in the chat?
Yeah, put it in the chat.
I try to fuck with that on my own, but I would love to take some drugs.
Yeah, I haven't been able to do that since I was a kid. That's awesome.
Everyone, you just got everyone so excited.
Yeah, the only thing is I don't love to take them because they do sort of fuck up your sleep, so you're not going to feel great the next day. So I try not to do it unless I'm really desperate for material.
Oh, this is really exciting. Hold on a minute.
Other than that, I mean, I write a lot of sort of like you know, sort of almost like Mary Oliver-esque poems about nature and birds. Anne Sexton was a huge source of inspiration. I love, you know, writing persona poems from the perspective of different mythological figures. And then more recently, computers and sort of science fiction themes have made their way into my writing.
Is the chapbook's called Name and Noun, right?
Yeah.
Is like a lot of the stuff I've read, like in Expat and like Misery Tourism and stuff, is that stuff in there, or is it like earlier?
No, so it's earlier stuff. Okay. Yeah, I mean it's frequently the case, you know, in publishing, that by the time you know, you get it out, you're sort of on to the next phase of your writing, and a different, obsessed with different topics. So that's kind of that situation.
Cool. Well,
I got a brief question here for Gabe or Siwa or basically whoever. You know, I notice with especially Gabe, but I see Sewell, you got the Miles Davis and the guitar in the background there. Like, how do you, when you write poetry, how do you find like a tone, if that makes sense for poetry? I know a lot of people have different ways for finding tones for music, or like, you know, a beat or something, a rhythm, whatever. Do you guys do that, or do you have a way of doing that? Because I notice a lot of your poetry is very like, the meter and stuff is very, you know, deliberate. And a lot of it, I was just wondering if that was a thing, but you did.
I mean, I'll say for sure, for me at least, there's a visual element to the poetry. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll write a poem or I'll start a poem. And one thing is I have to get the structure right. So the way it looks on paper and the way it looks on paper and on the page, whether it's, you know, three line stanzas and then another 3 line stanzas, or all meshed together, or, you know, very, very long poetry, very long, you know, words. I think that really kind of, for whatever reason, it's kind of a strange answer, I know, but the way that it looks in the physical structure of the poem on page sort of, for me, determines the meter and the way it flows. And so I'll try all sorts of different ways and to see how it looks. I know when it's right, and I know when it's wrong, but when it's right, that's kind of like it sets in concrete. That's when the poem becomes what it wants to be.
Yeah, I would have to completely, I would feel like I would have the exact same answer as CW. Like I never know really what tone I want a poem to be until it's done. And then after that, it's just sort of like omitting unnecessary words and stuff. And I love the way poems look on the page. And I like CW says, like I kind of know it when I see it. I know.
Sure.
So it's the best answer I can give is CW's answer.
Cool.
Is that it for questions? I think. Oh yeah, it's almost 7:30. We did good.
All right. Okay.
Well, shucks. Thank you so much for hosting, Stephanie. It means the world to me.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you.
And
great job.
Thank you, CW, and congratulations on River Street Rhapsody. And thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Totally rad. We'll see you. We'll see you out there. We're out there.
Thanks, everyone. Congratulations, Gabe and CW.
Thank you. I'll see you in a couple weeks, Steph.
Oh yeah, that's right. All right.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.